This week, we're going to look at two aspects of human resource management, those being human resource planning and diversity in the workplace. Human resource management is the parent term here, which in business or recreation organizations is essentially about first, finding the right person for the right job at the right time, and second, ensuring the organization has an appropriately trained and satisfied workforce. Human resource management in organizations aims to provide an effective, productive, and satisfied workforce. HRM is a process and refers to the design, development, implementation, management, and evaluation of systems and practices used by employers to recruit, select, develop, reward, retain, and evaluate their workforce. As such, human resource management as a subject is vast, and how we approach human resource management here in this course is very similar to how we considered and tackled legal issues in week 3, in that we recognize the breadth of the subject but then focus efforts on one area in an attempt to just move beyond just simply scratching the surface on the subject more holistically. The full breadth of the human resource management process includes a number of steps which can be separated into two categories. First is acquiring human resources, which involves planning, recruitment and selection and screening, basically everything up until a new employee's first day. Second is maintaining human resources, which, as you can see, involves orientation and induction, training and development, performance appraisal, rewards and recognition, and finally retention or replacement. And as the figure on this slide shows, the process is cyclical, which suggests that human resource management is a continuous process that ensures the experiences of the current workforce are fed back into the acquisition of the future workforce. Human resource planning, more specifically, is essentially about assessing and forecasting the staffing needs of the organization and is often referred to as the most important phase for effective human resource. The planning phase of human resource management, it's short and fairly static for organizations where staffing levels remain fairly constant and the types of jobs performed by those staff members varies very little. But for organizations that are dynamic or in a constant state of flux, say as a result of new programs being offered and or seasonal variances in workforce needs as examples, human resource planning is a cycle of ongoing development. Another way to conceptualize the difference between HR planning and HR management more generally is to consider that human resource planning addresses the workforce issues of a company in advance, as opposed to human resource management, which handles issues once workers are actually on board. Shivers and Halper suggest that the public recreational system has a comprehensive task of fulfilling recreational needs for all of the people in the community in which the department is situated, present as well as future citizens. Therefore, it's important for every recreational service department to have the most efficient and effective personnel possible through the enhancement of individual talent, skills and capacities of professional and technical employees. So in other words, human resource planning is in many ways synonymous with organizational level planning. So the process of strategic planning and HR planning should not be conducted in isolation of each other. One of the key inputs into the HR planning process is future demand. Specifically, Hoy and colleagues suggest an organization must assess whether current staffing needs will be adequate to meet future demand, or alternatively whether fewer staff will be required, whether staff turnover is predictable and can be accommodated, whether the ratios of paid full-time, part-time, casual and volunteer staff are appropriate or adequate, whether there are annual or cyclical fluctuations in staffing that need to be met and managed, and whether specific capabilities will be required in the future that the organization is currently lacking. I think what this flowchart by DeCenzo and Robbins does well is show the link between HR planning and the strategic planning process that I mentioned a couple of slides ago. You can see how the HR planning process starts with understanding the organization's mission as well as the goals and objectives, which is very similar to the strategic planning process and that VMOST pyramid that we talked about earlier in the course. In the assessment of current human resources, organizations consider the demand for labor and the supply of human resources. The demand for labor, another way to think about this, is heavily determined by the demand of your services by your consumers. Okay, and then this process kicks out two scenarios where either demand exceeds supply or supply exceeds demand. When labour demand exceeds the supply of human resources, this leads to recruitment, which is the process of locating, identifying and attracting capable applicants to an organisation. When supply of human resources exceeds the labour demand, this leads to decruitment, which is the process of reducing a surplus of employees in the workforce of an organisation. Now, we're all pretty familiar with the scenario where the consideration of supply and demand leads to a need for recruitment. But I just wanted to take a moment to have a deeper look at some decruitment options, okay? And there are 7 listed here on this page from Robbins and Coulter. First is firing, so permanent involuntary termination of employees. There's also layoffs, so temporary involuntary termination of employees. Attrition, so organization does not fill the openings created by voluntary resignations or normal retirements of its employees, and that attrition takes place over a much longer period of time. There's transfers, so organizations with multiple units operating maybe in one large headquarter or maybe different geographical areas. Employees are moved either laterally or downward. Reduced work weeks, employees work fewer hours per week, they share jobs or perform their jobs on a part-time basis. Early retirements, so again, similar to kind of attrition, but organization provides incentives to older and more senior employees for retiring before their normal retirement date. And this often, early retirements, I've found happens quite often in the public sector. I think there are a lot of people that consider, working in government, whether it be the federal, state, or local level, kind of real civil servant positions to be a lifelong career. So what you have is a lot of folks that have built up quite a number of years of service, and actually early retirement becomes a particularly attractive option for those people. And then finally there's job sharing, so employees sharing one full-time position. But then once an organization understands whether supply exceeds demand or vice versa, attention then falls to a process of studying a job or jobs to determine which activities and responsibilities it includes, its relative importance to other jobs, the qualifications necessary for its performance, and the conditions under which the work is performed, which is called job analysis. All right, following job analysis is job design, which refers to the process in which the work is structured and specific tasks and responsibilities are designated to individuals or groups, and helps to determine what tasks are done, how the tasks are done, how many tasks are done, and in what order the tasks are done. One way in which jobs are designed is through the concept of job specialization, which is the division of labor into specialist spheres. So in other words, specialization is when you focus on one job instead of doing every job at once, okay, which makes the opposite of a specialist. So that's the single arrow hitting the bullseye on the left of the screen. The opposite is a generalist, okay, and that's the image on the right hand screen, the image of a larger bullseye where the arrows are not dead center but nonetheless are still on the actual target. I think one way to help conceptualize this is to consider your own job and whether you are considered by your agency as fulfilling a specialist or generalist position. I know when I was looking for jobs out of my PhD, I had a very niche specialization of environmental sustainability in sport. So I had to spend quite a lot of time persuading departments through the recruitment process that I was more of a generalist. Okay, so if I hadn't, then I would have potentially been considered to have too narrow a skill set, which wouldn't fit, especially for an institution like Frostburg State, where I teach across sport and recreation and parks, as well as across different topical areas like facilities, law, ethics, management, marketing and communication. If you take the right hand side target from the previous slide where the arrows were sort of scattered, there are a number of alternatives to specialization. For example, there's job rotation, which involves workers swapping jobs on a periodic basis in order to keep fresh and stimulated. The bottom right image here shows the idea of rotation, very simply, where 4 employees rotate through 4 different jobs. There's also job enlargement, which refers to a process in which employees are encouraged to enlarge the scope of their work and add tasks. The top right image shows on the top row very specialized jobs, and then on the bottom row, after enlargement, these jobs are now enlarged, whereby there's a significant crossover and overlap between positions. There are, of course, lots of other issues that go into whether an organisation prefers to have specialist or generalist positions. Think about organisational size, an example. I'm aware of a number of small non-profit organisations where senior management wear multiple hats, where the culture is very much all hands on deck and whatever it takes to get the job done. I've included a supporting material which is directly posted in the case study instructions that further define the concept of job specialization. I think it will come in handy when you're discussing job design as it relates to Great Wall Golf and Country Club. It also provides some advantages and disadvantages to the particular approach of job specialization, both from an organizational and individual perspective. So that wraps up this first recording on human resource planning, and in the second of 2 recordings this week we turn our attention to diversity in the workplace.